Welcome back to Indiana at the voice of college football. And we got the 19th edition of the show coming around the corner. Appreciate you guys for being here. And definitely some big news that has happened in the world of the Indiana Hoosiers since our last show. A lot of interesting stuff to talk about as we get this show on the road. Definitely when you look at Indiana football, light news. There's not a lot to talk about with Indiana football, but we are going to have a Indiana football segment regardless. Every week we're going to make sure that we do talk about a little bit of Indiana football despite there not being a whole lot of news. Always going to deliver that. But definitely the show is going to be a little bit more heavy on Indiana basketball because the news going on with the Hoosier basketball program with March Madness right around the corner. It's getting really interesting. So definitely excited to talk about that. But if you haven't already, subscribe down below to Indiana at the voice of college football. We're trying to grow the channel. We're getting close to 100 subscribers. Definitely appreciate your guys' support and like the stream as well. And definitely not going to want to miss future content if you are an Indiana fan or not. But the one thing I will say, talking about Indiana football on this edition of Indiana Hoosiers Live, is more teams cancel non-conference games in college football. What does it mean for Indiana? Well, I think that Indiana caught a lot of flack from canceling that Louisville game last year. Everybody remembers that. A lot of people were trolling Indiana football for canceling that game, even though that was Tom Allen. If Curt Cignetti was the head coach already at Indiana football, I do not believe that that would have occurred. I don't believe that Indiana would have canceled that game, but we will never know for sure whether that would have been the case or not because Curt Cignetti wasn't the coach yet. So Tom Allen, he ended up canceling that game, I guess, as part of a last-ditch effort to maybe save his job. I mean, he knew that he needed to stack wins if he was going to have any chance of remaining the head coach of Indiana football. And I mean, he just didn't do it. So, he did not get this season, of being able to coach. He didn't get his, I think, 8th or 9th season. I think it might have been his 9th year. He was at Indiana for a long time, but he wasn't given that shot. He was fired. So Indiana cancels that game against Louisville, and a lot of people were upset saying, well, Indiana didn't deserve to be in the playoff. They didn't play anybody in the non-conference. You're rewarding a team for playing nobody, essentially, outside of a couple of tough conference opponents. My problem with that, analysis is you've expanded the playoffs to 12 teams. I've talked about this before on other shows on the Voice of College Football and my own channel as well, Only Talk Sports. I've mentioned this tons of times that if you wanted to expand the playoffs, there was going to be a lot of problems that occurred with that. And one of those that no one really thought of outside of a few people that really paid attention and knew that this was going to be a problem was the fact that Indiana, and other programs were going to cancel non-conference games with the sake of trying everything they could to make the playoffs. And now that you have a 12-team playoff, it's easier to get in. You can lose 2 or 3 games. But if you play, Ohio State, Michigan in the Big Ten or USC, whatever, and in the SEC, you play Bama, Georgia, LSU all in the same season, and you're a team like Ole Miss, you cannot afford to have a tough non-conference game. You just can't if you want to make the playoffs. This was never an issue before with a 4-team playoff because decent teams, decent to good teams, if they played a pretty tough non-conference game and lost, more than likely they were going to lose 2 or 3 games in conference play as well, and then they were not going to have any shot at getting in the playoffs anyway, and they would still get a New Year's Six bowl or a really good bowl game. Now that's not the case. The goal is all or nothing. It's to make the playoffs. It's a 12-team playoff. If you don't make the playoffs, it's an absolute and utter failure, a disappointment. I mean, obviously programs like Indiana, who normally are always bad, I mean, in that instance for Indiana, they're not going to be a team that's looking to make the playoffs every year. Curt Cignetti's trying to change that, and we'll see if he does. Definitely hope that he does. And if he does, that would be fantastic for Indiana, to really build up their, status in college football. But, realistically, unless he's able to do the unthinkable and have Indiana be super competitive and in the college football playoff race every year, that's not going to be the case. So for other programs like that, does it really still matter all that much if you play a tough non-conference game and lose? Not really. Problem is, though, to play a tough non-conference game, you got to play somebody that is going to care. And a program like Alabama football, it benefits them in no way, shape, or form to play a game in the non-conference against Ohio State or, Michigan or some other great program, Clemson. It just doesn't, because you don't win that game. It puts so much more pressure on you to basically almost not, you don't have to go undefeated. You can still lose a game. You can lose two games. I mean, Alabama almost got in with 3 losses, but it was who they lost to. It really kept them out. And teams like Indiana and SMU that almost ran the table and made it where they got in. But you can only afford therefore to lose one more tough game. So to me, just when you look at all of those factors, the playoff expansion is the number one ultimate reason why marquee non-conference games are going away. And I have it on screen because this was the major announcement the other day. Nebraska to pay Tennessee $1 million over a canceled football series. This isn't the only one. There have been tons of other examples. I'm not even going to go through the list because in the last probably 5 to 7 seasons, there have been, and maybe even further back to 10 seasons ago, there have been multiple marquee non-conference matchups that didn't get to exist. Absolutely did not get to exist. And I will say another thing. A lot of people upset about it because the marquee non-conference matchups, they're almost are going to the wayside. Yes, you still have a few ones on the docket. I think Alabama might have a couple down the road if they keep them. Ohio State has a couple tough non-conference games coming up. They still exist. Notre Dame provides good non-conference matchups every year because they're an independent. They have to play tough teams. Somebody's got to play them. If they didn't, then Notre Dame would have to basically go undefeated every year to get in, if they played nobody. But the thing is that when you look at the fact now that the Big Ten and the SEC have the vast majority of good teams in college football in the 2 conferences, and the Big 12 and ACC are significantly weaker, and no other conference even comes close to comparing besides that, in the college football playoff, you're going to have these teams facing each other. Now, that's not an excuse to say, yay, no non-conference games. It doesn't matter. I'm not saying that. But you are still going to get these games. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to play each other in the college football playoff. We already saw, Ohio State play Tennessee. We saw that. We saw Ohio State play Texas. So it's going to happen. You're just not going to get it in the beginning of the season. You're just going to get it at the end of the season. Does that make it good? Not necessarily, because I still prefer having those really good non-conference games. The only thing I never liked about non-conference games is there's nothing that you can do about it, but I never liked the fact that the games would be at the beginning of the season, like week 1, and then that was supposed to be indicative of whether a team was better or not. Like when Texas beat Alabama in week 2 a couple seasons ago, and people are like, oh, Texas is better than Alabama. Alabama got better as the season went along and Nick Saban's final season. And by the end of the year, I think Alabama was a better team than Texas. But Texas still got in over Bama because of head-to-head. And I understand that in that scenario, you have to look at head-to-head. I get that. Texas won in Tuscaloosa, but that was week 2 of the season. Texas had Quinn Ewers. I mean, he was a veteran guy even at that point, enough anyway. And Jalen Milroe, it was his first time taking the reins. I mean, situations like that, it is just really tough, especially in college football where you got less games to go off of to say, hey, this team beat this team in week 1, by this score. They're the better team. I mean, like Georgia beat Clemson that one year in week 1, 10-3. And by the end of the season, Georgia was blitzing everybody, and Clemson was terrible. If Georgia replayed that game, they'd beat Clemson probably about 50 instead of 7. So, yeah, it is what it is. I mean, I understand, again, the college football purists wants these games, and I don't blame them for wanting these games. I want the games. I love seeing great games early in the season, but if marquee non-conference matchups go by the wayside completely, you're not losing the marquee games between the top-tier conferences, because that's basically what most people even care about at this point is the Big Ten and the SEC. And those teams are going to play each other in the playoff. They're going to play each other at the end of the year and to determine who's going to end up winning it all. So not all is lost. It is frustrating. It does take the spirit out of college football sales a little bit, and with the history and all that kind of stuff, but of what used to happen. But all this change has happened. Rubber meets the road. The can's been kicked down the road, whatever you want to say. And college football, I mean, it's not going to be the same with all these rule changes with NIL, the portal, the playoff expansion. We'll see what happens in future years. what's done about some of these things, whether some of it gets kind of reined back in, which some of it probably should be. I mean, I don't want any more expansion. I don't want it expanded to 16 or 24, but that's not what this segment's about. The segment was about non-conference games. And what I think it means for Indiana is I do think it's going to take the proverbial monkey off Indiana's back that, hey, you're canceling non-conference games. You don't deserve to be in the playoff if you go 11-1 or 10-2. I think that argument's gone. I think it's gone because you're seeing everybody do it. You're seeing other marquee programs way better than Indiana canceling these type of games because they know it does not benefit their program in any way, shape, or form. It does not benefit Nebraska to play this game. It just doesn't. And Tennessee, it doesn't really either. Because Tennessee, yeah, they play a tough enough SEC schedule every year. If they go 10-2, they're in the playoff. You don't need a game against Nebraska in week 1 or week 2 where you might slip up. Or in Nebraska's case, they're a program trying to get back to being what they used to be, and they're still a long ways away. They're not anywhere close to being at the level that they used to be back in the Osborne days. They need to just get wins. They need to get stability, and playing a tough non-conference game against Tennessee doesn't really help either. So you're just seeing these games go by the wayside. I think it makes it look better for teams like Indiana that it's not their fault these games are going away. The expansion is the main reason why this is going away with the playoff. But like I said, that's on I guess you could say like the playoff committee members and other people that were pushing for this stuff. People like me that weren't pushing for expansion, I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but there's nothing you can do about it. And I definitely think that the days of marquee non-conference games, unless something changes in the future, are definitely not going to be as big of a deal as they were in the past. But definitely flipping back to Indiana basketball. That was the Indiana football segment of the week. I know it's not really heavy on IU football news, but not a lot of stuff to talk about right now. We will definitely have more Indiana football coverage in future weeks, especially when more news comes around, especially maybe with spring. But Indiana basketball. The only reason that I'm even really talking about IU heavily on this show, I would have probably talked more about Indiana football. I would have found some news or, had some like speculation stuff. It's like time of the year where you have speculation. Like what would happen in this scenario? Is this guy going to be good? Just off-season talk. But IU basketball's back. And they're not back, the Bob Knight days. They're back to national championship, level, competition out there the way they're playing. No, none of that. Not even close. But they beat Purdue. And I did a segment last week saying, did Indiana, were they gonna be able to beat Purdue? Did they still have a chance to make the NCAA tournament? And I said that if they beat Purdue, then yes, they still have a really solid chance to make the NCAA tournament. But they had to win that game. And it was not a must win. I know some people are saying that it was a must win. It technically wasn't, because if they lose that game to Purdue on Sunday and then they had a 1 out the rest of the way, Indiana probably gets in. The thing is, though, is I don't think that they would have done that. That's why Purdue was a must-win. Because if they don't beat Purdue, the team probably would have been demoralized because they've had so many tough losses this year to Maryland and Michigan and UCLA and at Purdue. All these close losses. A team can only take so many close losses before they just throw in the towel. But the rubber met the road, and Indiana went and just completely destroyed Purdue. 73-58. And I know people are like, well, it's at Assembly Hall. They should do that. Indiana has not done well against Purdue. I mean, that's just, let's face it. They've been awful against Purdue in the last 15 to 20 years, essentially since Matt Painter took over. And that's the little bit of Kelvin Sampson time at Indiana aside. Indiana has been pretty rough since 2005. The one or two really good season with Tom Crean as well. But other than that, not good. So Purdue's been dominating Indiana. And it doesn't matter whether it's at Mackey or Assembly Hall. Purdue's just been beating Indiana over and over. I think that before this game, they were 16-4 in their last 20 games against Indiana. And 3 of those wins for Indiana were under Mike Woodson. And a couple of those wins at Assembly Hall were very close wins. Everybody remembers the Rob Finney shot. That was a great game, but Indiana barely squeaked out that one. And then the game where Purdue was number 1 and Indiana won at Assembly Hall with Trace Jackson Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino. That was a good game as well, but they barely squeaked out both those games. Then Indiana went to Purdue in that same season and won. And that was their biggest win versus Purdue in a long time. And then Indiana, they beat Purdue back with Tom Crean, I think in 2016. So that's like the last 4 wins for Indiana against Purdue. So coming into this game, Purdue was on a 3-game slide. Purdue had lost 3 in a row. Purdue's not on the ropes or anything. Like, they're gonna make the tournament easily. I mean, their Big Ten tournament, like title chances rather, have basically diminished. They're not going to win the Big Ten regular season title. Now it's probably going to go to Michigan or Michigan State at this point. Maybe Wisconsin if they can get it together. But Purdue, they've ruined their chances of doing that. But they're still easily a tournament team. They're a lock. And overall, considering that they've lost Zach Edey, they're still having a pretty good year. I mean, it's not like it's been a dumpster fire or anything. They're still ranked right now. I mean, they're having a pretty good year. But lately, they've been struggling because Purdue is starting to get exposed for their weaknesses right now. Like, when you look at the fact they don't have rim protection, I think Purdue's leading shot blocker has 8 blocks all season. That's an hilarious stat. The fact that we're almost at the end of the season and Purdue's leading shot blocker has 8 blocks on the entire season is absolutely crazy. That's rough. That is low. I mean, most teams, have like around 5 blocks a game on average, 4 or 5 or 6 blocks a game with the whole team. And Purdue's leading shot blocker has 8 blocks on the season. So Purdue doesn't protect the rim. Why Purdue is good is because their backcourt is pesky. Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, especially Braden Smith. He's a very pesky guard, but he's starting to get rattled a bit. Now that so much pressure is being put on him and some of the supporting cast for Purdue has been struggling a bit lately. And Trey Kaufman-Renn and Caleb First, pretty good players, especially with Kaufman-Renn, but they're undersized. So definitely Purdue's weaknesses are getting exposed a little bit. And Indiana came out of the gate playing great basketball. And then Mike Woodson did what he always does, literally again and again. What did Mike Woodson do? Mackenzie Mbako, Umar Ballo, and Malik Renew. All 3 of those guys on the floor at the same time toward the end of the first half, and the game just completely fell apart. Absolutely fell apart. And they went from being up like 5, I think it was like 21-16 Indiana, to I think Purdue led 37-25 at half. So it was a complete turnaround, and absolutely 110% on Mike Woodson. And what's just so irritating is that Indiana fans know this every single time. People get mad at Indiana fans for being too brash or too hard on their coaches or acting like they're know-it-alls. And yeah, every fan base has annoying fans. That's just the way that it is. But a lot of Indiana fans are not dumb either. I mean, they know basketball at least at an amateur level if you're coming from an outsider perspective. I think a lot of Indiana fans are, the ones that are not like just the Twitter people that just go off and go crazy about everything and say moronic things like a lot of other people do on Twitter. They actually know what they're talking about. They know they've been watching basketball, especially people that have watched since the Bob Knight days for a long time. They know what good basketball is and they know what bad basketball is. And Mike Woodson playing 3 guys that are pretty big and clog up the paint and don't even rebound that well outside of Umar Ballo is bad. No floor spacing, especially when Mbako just sits in the corner and doesn't do anything. It's terrible basketball. And that's why they were losing at half. And then in the second half, he goes with the lineup that he went with in the first half that got him the lead, and he stuck with it. Miles Rice, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, Luke Goody, and then switching Renew and Ballo. And that's it. Didn't do anything else. And I understand Mike Woodson said after the game that, I can't play those guys 40 minutes. I just can't do that. You might not. I think you could, but you might not. But you don't need to play those other guys much. I think Mackenzie Mbako is a very talented player, but the guy doesn't defend. He does not play hard on defense, and that hurts you. Mackenzie Mbako essentially has to score 20 points to even offset his lack of defense because he gets beat on defense, either because he's a little step slow or he's guarding someone shorter, or sometimes he just completely disengaged on the defensive side of the ball and lets the other team get easy buckets all over. You can't have that. So again, if Mbako doesn't score 20, 25 points, he's a net minus every game. If he only has 10 points, he's giving up more on the defensive end. So he's a liability. It's unfortunate, but he is. Kanan Carlisle, he's an energy spark plug type of guy who I feel probably works better when he's got the ball in his hands more. Kind of like a combo guard. That's what he did at Stanford. Woody just parks him in the corner, so he's useless. So don't really play him either. Leal, ultimate glue guy. The guy just hustles. And I know people were trashing Leal for the kick or whatever early in that game. And yes, if he got ejected, Indiana probably doesn't win. But I watched that play about 100 times, and I did not see anything worth being ejected over. To me, Caleb First for Purdue dragged Anthony Leal down. To me, that should have been a flagrant one on Caleb First. And then it looked like Caleb First, when Leal was trying to get up, kind of put his legs together to kind of pin Leal's foot down, and Leal was just trying to drag him off. Leal was not purposely trying to hit him in the land down under, per se. That was not the intent, in my opinion. Leal wasn't even looking at him. I can understand if Leal's looking right at Caleb First. Like, he's got both his eyes staring right at him, and then he just kicks him hard. Like, no, he didn't do that. Leal was trying to get up and go down the floor the other way, and that's just my take on that. Leal did not deserve to get ejected. Caleb First should have got a flagrant one. And the commentator during that game was Leal should be gone. Leal should be gone. I've never heard anything in my life that was just so skewed. I'm like, God, you got to be kidding me. I mean, you got to be impartial here. Purdue should have got a flagrant. But they didn't call anything. I would have preferred them to call nothing than to call a flagrant one on Caleb First and then eject Leal, because Leal did not need to be ejected. But thankfully, he wasn't ejected. I mean, if Leal had done wrong, if he purposefully did that, then yeah, I would say eject Leal, but he didn't. But Mike Woodson, why he's gone and why he's not going to be the coach next season is because of his refusal to learn from what he has done wrong in the past. And I understand he's like, well, I don't use social media. If he would just listen to the IU fan base, the ones that make sense, then he would have known not to play those three guys together. I understand statistically you're looking on paper and you're like, well, Ballo averages 14. Renew averages 14. And Baco averages 14. I got to have all those guys on the floor. They scored the most points. I understand that. But those guys score the most points when they're on the floor, not next to each other. Ballo is so much better when Renew's not out there. Renew is so much better when Ballo's not out there. And Mbako is much better when he's at the 4 than versus the 3. It's not that complicated. It's very simple stuff, in my opinion. I've been seeing it all year. A lot of Indiana fans have noticed it for years. And I will say the next Indiana coach, whoever it is, and like I said, if Indiana has not gotten a coach, like in the next couple of weeks, we're definitely going to have a big segment talking about like each individual candidate. Not going to do that this week because I don't think Indiana's going to hire anybody yet. I could be wrong, but we're not even close to the end of the season. They're going to probably wait till at least March Madness, to announce that. I think they're really doing a full search and trying to get this hire right. Like, Indiana cannot get this hire wrong. But whoever's the next Indiana coach, I'm not saying you got to listen to the Indiana fan base. I'm not saying that because, again, if you listen to them all the time, that's not going to help you either. But when it is so obvious that, like, everybody is just, screaming at you to make this change because it's that egregious, you got to do it. And honestly, if you're the next Indiana coach, there should not be anything that you do that is that egregiously bad that people would be that upset over. That's just my opinion. Like, if you are doing a good job as the Indiana head coach or at any job, people should not be complaining about the choices you make of who's on the floor. You know what I'm saying? Like, people can, debate like your style of play a little bit. They can debate, certain things like, oh, if you had done this, whatever. But when you're just flat out debating who you have on the floor and how you're using them, then you got a problem. And that's the way it's been for way too long. Indiana won this game. With all that being said, because Mike Woodson had the right combination of players on the floor for the first time all season for a whole half. And we saw this team completely bludgeon Purdue. And I know that this is a rivalry game, and I know it's one game. But I do believe that Indiana, I really do believe that Indiana, with the talent that they have, even though it is poorly constructed together, this is easily an NCAA tournament team if Mike Woodson had done the right things with this roster this season. And he didn't do it until now. And we'll see if he reverts back to his old ways or whether he'll leave the right players on the floor for the rest of the season. Because if he does, next segment, Indiana will make the tournament. Their hopes have already improved. Indiana is in much better shape just by this win alone than they were before. If you guys remember probably from last week, I showed this, graphic from the bracketmatrix.com site, which aggregates all of the bracketologists together and their projections on whether a team's going to make the tournament or not. Last week, I think Indiana was in like two brackets out of, 105 or however many brackets there are. Right now, they're in 46. And they're basically in the bracket matrix aggregate the first team out. And really, they're basically in the field because all the brackets that have been updated since that game, like 70 to 80% of them have Indiana in the field. And you see the team that's dropping out. Ohio State's only in 62 of the brackets. And I think after that updates today, I think Indiana will be on the 11 line completely, and Ohio State will have dropped out. Because Ohio State, even though certain bracketologists, including a certain guy at ESPN, still have Ohio State still somehow in the field, they should not be in the field. I don't care that they got 5 quad 1 wins. They're 15-13. You cannot make the tournament only 2 games above 500. I think the only team that did that was Georgia back in 2001. They went 16-14 and they got in, but that was because their schedule was just insane and it was another weak bubble year. And I know that this year's bubble is very weak, but what you're starting to see though is these teams in the first 4 out range, like Xavier and North Carolina and Boise State. And I know people don't want to hear it with North Carolina, but they are winning even though they're playing terrible teams. If they beat Duke, they're going to get in the tournament. Can they beat Duke? It's a whole other different story. If they don't, probably have to go on a big run in the ACC tournament. But these teams are starting to win. Xavier's been winning. If they beat Creighton, some bracketologists are already starting to put them in. As you can see, CBS has them as an 11 seed. So you're seeing some of these teams start to win. That's going to move Ohio State out. That's going to move probably a team like Wake Forest out. Oklahoma, Arkansas, they're still hanging on for dear life. Vandy and Texas. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the SEC bubble. You got Vandy, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Georgia. Georgia's kind of fallen off. They're out right now, according to most people. Most bracketologists will see they have a big game against Florida. If they can win that game, they'd be right back in. But Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas. I think out of these 5 teams, I think it's a question of whether 2 or 3 are going to make it. I don't think you're going to see 4 out of the 5 make it because they're just going to keep beating each other up, I think. So I don't think you're going to get that 14-team SEC, but you're still going to have a record. I think you're going to get 12, maybe 13, which would beat the Big East record of 11 teams getting in from the same conference back in 2013. So it's just crazy with the bubble right now. It's a thin margin for error right now between, the bubble teams. Like, there's no difference essentially between like Arkansas's resume and Indiana's. There's not much difference between Carolina and Xavier's. They're all practically even. They're right on the cusp. So these teams are going to play their way in and play their way out of the next couple games. But when you look at Indiana, though, their tournament chances dramatically improve because, I mean, I can even look at other sites real quick, not even just the bracket matrix, to really prove how big of a deal that Purdue game was for Indiana's chances. Bart Torvik, which I'm sure some of you have heard of that. It's a site that aggregates, like through a lot of numerical stuff. It's a lot of formulas and stuff that he does to, congregate, like team statistics or whatever and how good or bad a team is. Indiana was like the 12th team out in his. And I know he still has them out right now, but that's only because of their net. That's why bracketologists are kind of going against his model and saying Indiana's in right now. But he has Indiana with a 35% chance in his model of getting into the tournament. And prior to that, it was only at 3%. So they went from 3% to 35% in one game. That is how big of a deal it was for Indiana to win that game against Purdue. Now they got 4 quad 1 wins. And a lot of other bubble teams, they can't say that. Carolina has 1. SMU is 0. Xavier is 1. I think Wake's got like 2. And then you have, I know the SEC teams like Arkansas and Oklahoma have like 5. But if those teams keep losing like Ohio State does, they're going to fall on the wrong side. So looking at Indiana's rest of the schedule, and we'll keep updating it week by week if Indiana keeps, being in the bubble conversation for making the tournament. I think they got to go 3-1. They got Penn State at home tomorrow, must win. Cannot drop that game, cannot have a letdown game after beating Purdue. Plus, if they lose to Penn State, that will be their first quad 2 loss, which is one of Indiana's pluses on their resume, that they don't have a quad 2 through 4 loss. Cannot lose that game. They have at Washington. That's basically a must-win too. Neither team's good. Neither team is, anywhere near even the middle of the Big Ten in wins. That they're at the bottom. Got to win that game. At Oregon, that's the game that you can forgive. If Indiana loses that game, they probably will still remain on the right side of the bubble. But can't get blown out either. Cannot have any more blowouts because that would hurt Indiana's metrics. So got to be at least competitive in that game. If you beat Oregon, especially since Oregon's playing a lot better, then it makes the Ohio State game, the final game of the season at home, also senior night, all that kind of stuff. That makes that game less important. It makes it where you don't have to win that game if you lose to Oregon, if you beat Oregon. If you lose to Oregon, though, then you have to beat Ohio State. And sometimes senior night jitters, last game at home, we've seen a lot of teams choke. And Ohio State could be a team that's still maybe fighting on the bubble, hungry to maybe get in if they can turn it around. That's an interesting game. So Indiana has to go 3-1. And even if they lose to like Penn State, I wouldn't recommend it. But even if they lost to Penn State, if they won the other three, beat Washington, Oregon, and Ohio State, they'd get in. They just got to go 3-1. It really doesn't matter who the one loss is to as long as they win 3 of these. Now, am I confident that they're going to win 3 of these? Of course not. It's Mike Woodson led Indiana. Of course not. I mean, I wouldn't count on it at all. But they have a great chance to get into the NCAA tournament because they beat Purdue. They've set themselves up to be in position. You'd have no shot to get into the tournament if you don't at least put yourself in position to. And Indiana did that with that big win over Purdue. It was a great game. That second half was one of the best stretches of basketball I've seen, honestly, from Indiana since the Tom Crean years. It was fun. 28-3 run. They were balling. It was great. And hopefully Indiana can continue to back that up, the win at Michigan State and the Purdue win with some more wins in the final games of the season, and they can get in. And funny thing is, though, even if Indiana doesn't make the tournament, I think a lot of people are starting to figure out about this college basketball crown thing that's supposed to compete with the NIT or whatever. That's hilarious. So, like the NIT, as you well know, Indiana, they declined the NIT last year, and a lot of teams have been doing that. North Carolina's declined the NIT. A lot of teams are declining the NIT. So now Fox is like, you know what? We're going to do this college basketball crown that's going to compete with the NIT, with teams from the Big Ten, Big East, all the conferences that Fox airs. And if you get an auto bid, so like if Indiana misses the tournament and they're like the 1 seed in this college basketball crown, most likely Indiana has to play in the game. I don't know for sure. I've not gotten definitive info on this, but I do believe that if you get the auto bid in this tournament, you have to play in it. Now, if you're like an at-large, I think you can decline. So, like if Indiana was going to be like a 3 seed in this college basketball crown and an at-large, they could be like, you know what, Woodson's on the way out. We want to end this season, focus on hiring the new coach, get things right for next season, whatever. And that's fair. But if they're the 1 seed in this thing, I think they're going to have to play, and that would be hilarious because, like, Mike Woodson, he's probably going to coach still. Indiana fans would just be like, why is this happening? This is kind of humiliating. I mean, for me, I always am going to want more basketball, so I would want them to play in it, but it's going to be interesting to see with that. Definitely, if Indiana does end up playing in that tournament, we'll definitely talk more about the college basketball crown. Just wanted to mention that. But Indiana's definitely, if it's improved their NCAA tournament hopes with a win over Purdue, and I would not have thought that a few weeks ago after they, lost all those close home games to Michigan and Maryland. I thought they were toast, but then they beat Michigan State and they got a chance, and now they beat Purdue, and Indiana's right back in the thick of it. Going to be interesting to see if Mike Woodson can actually, in his final season, proverbially get him over the hump into the NCAA tournament. But before we get out of here, definitely appreciate all you guys for being here tonight. Definitely want to talk about, before we go, those sponsorships at thevoiceofcollegefootball.com. New thing going around at the Voice of College Football. Sponsorships. Definitely trying to get more sponsors to the Voice of College Football. Lisa Wynn, owner of Wynn Agency, has definitely been a happy customer when it is regards to the Voice of College Football. Has had a great experience over on the Michigan channel with John and TJ over there. Our social media and web engagement has gone up since we started the campaign, and we have acquired some new clients as a result of this sponsorship. And that is what sponsorships do. Benefits the Voice of College Football community, benefits everybody around here, and it also benefits you as well. So if you are, watching this show and you got, an organization or a product that you want to promote, email at sponsorship at thevoiceofcollegefootball.com. Email Mark Rogers, definitely, or any of us as well, at the Voice of College Football community, and definitely try to make a sponsorship happen. It helps you, helps us. Definitely a great deal there. Very excited about this new thing going on at the voice of college football. But appreciate everybody for being here tonight. Definitely great show, with you guys always being in the audience. It would not be great without you guys. Always appreciate your guys' support. Appreciate Jackson, him being here tonight. Jackson's the best. Always enjoy doing the show with him on the Alabama channel every Thursday night. Also, my YouTube channel, Only Talk Sports. If you're not subscribed over there, definitely appreciate if you go check out Only Talk Sports. Also, subscribe to Indiana at the voice of college football as well. Would definitely appreciate it. I agree, Jackson. Listening to the fan base, not always a good move. Michigan fans wanted Harbaugh gone. I agree on that. But Mike Woodson should have listened in this case with the roster management. Absolutely should have, but I totally agree. Sometimes you cannot listen to the fan base. Buzz Williams to the rescue. Not a bad option. I think Buzz Williams would do a good job in Indiana. Don't know if he would want the job, but I don't think he would do a bad job. Otzelberger as well. But we'll talk about Indiana potential candidates probably next week for sure. Godfather of the SEC, appreciate you being here, saying hello, everybody. Definitely thanks for stopping by. But appreciate you guys for stopping by tonight. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Share the stream out on social media. And thanks for everybody for being here. And go Hoosiers.